We're skipping astronomy today at the kitchen table of Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hameed, Mr. Universe, who wears another hat as a board member of Amherst Cinema. And there's some really exciting stuff happening at Amherst Cinema right now and this week. I've mentioned on the show before that my mother is dying. So we are in this era where people say the veil is the thinnest. And what is the better thing to do to help navigate through these trying things that we as human beings experience rather than immerse yourself in the world of fiction and science fiction? So I literally left my mother's dying bedside in Rentham, Massachusetts when she fell asleep and drove 2 hours to see the 9:30 showing at Amherst Cinema on opening night of Guillermo del Toro's new rendition of Frankenstein. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Well, sorry to hear about your mother. We have
You're going to hear about this a lot until the time comes, and then probably after that too.
And it's always tough, and that's what good literature does.
Yeah.
And literature allows you to, good literature, I would say, allows you to, in some ways, put those feelings to sort of words to those feelings, and also how do you think about those, interpret those, and yeah, it is always tricky. My father passed away this last month in September, so it's death is always sort of as you say, it's a certainty. Mm-hmm. I don't want to bring up taxes because it's unclear whether taxes are certain or not for certain people, but death is certain for everybody.
And Frankenstein, of course, is the first science fiction novel by most accounts written by a teenage Mary Shelley who grew up raised by an atheist father and a feminist mother and was an outcast herself, became enamored with the famous writer Percy Shelley. They had a tumultuous, tempestuous, and open relationship. And the story goes that the Lord Byron, the famous poet, challenged at this gathering Shelley and Mary Shelley and himself and others who were at this gathering to write a ghost story. And what Mary Shelley comes up with is, by all accounts, the first science fiction novel of all time.
Yeah, and this is 1818. So this is actually 1816 was when this particular event happened, as you mentioned, and that interestingly has something to do with a volcano.
Yeah,
because there was a volcano in Indonesia, Mount Tambora, which actually exploded or spew out ashes, and it covered the entire globe. And because of that, this happened in, I think, late 1815. And because of that, there was a lot more rain during 1816. And sometimes it's called sort of the year of no sun. And because of that, these folks, Lord Byron, he had a place in Switzerland around Lake Geneva. And they didn't have much to do. So, and yeah, the TV choices were limited.
Right? It wasn't the golden age of television yet.
And so he challenged, that, okay, well, let's come up with a ghost story. And there was another person there as well, John William Polidori, who was his personal physician. And he was very young too. I think he was 2021 or something like that. And he knew about a lot of medical advances that were going on at the time, and they all wrote parts of it. Lord Byron wrote parts of a poem. Polidori wrote a small story called Vampire, which actually 70 years later became the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Nice.
So again, coming from the same
gathering of mind.
Yeah. And of course, Mary Shelley's, at that time, she was not Shelley yet because she had not married Percy Shelley yet. But her story then turned into a novel 2 years later because they all heard that story and it was like, whoa, turn it into a novel, and she did, and that became Frankenstein, and a modern Prometheus. The original title has Frankenstein, a modern Prometheus, and of course Prometheus, the legend the Greek god stealing fire from the gods and giving it to humans. Of course, that's part of the story and part of this mythology.
And it was published anonymously, A, because it was by a woman, and B, because it was scandalous at the time to insinuate that anything other than God could bestow life. So then it became hugely successful even in its time and was republished, I think, about 15, 20 years later with her actual name and her accreditation. But it has been interpreted many, many times in the world of film, and now it has been reinterpreted by the, I think, excellent filmmaker, Guillermo del Toro. You have also seen the new rendition of Frankenstein at Amherst Cinema, which you have only a few more days to see because Netflix made this movie. And they want you to watch it on Netflix, but they want it to win Oscars, so it has to go to movie theaters. They only put it in movie theaters, I think, for a week. And this week is ending this week.
This is a big screen film. Yeah. Guillermo del Toro, I mean, the cinematography is amazing. And again, we are not going to be giving spoilers because this novel was published in 1818.
Yeah, and 200 years.
That's correct.
Get your mind wrapped around.
And you should read the book because the book is fantastic.
I remember reading the book the first time and being like blown away.
Because most of the films don't actually go to the most interesting parts of the book.
Yeah.
They focus more on the horror parts, which actually is not the interesting part because the interesting part is about the monster and how he develops intelligence and other types of things, which this movie, by the way, does. This movie is closer to the book. And so the movie starts and the book starts in close to the North Pole, let's put it this way. And it's beautifully shot. Guillermo del Toro knows what to do with monsters as well. I mean, of course, if you hopefully you have seen it, but if you haven't, see Pan's Labyrinth or Shape of Water, and also his wonderful stop motion Pinocchio.
I can't believe how good that one is too, and it's haunting and beautiful
and emotional. I mean, again, this is one of those movies where, I mean, it's hard not to cry. Yeah. It's like so amazing.
I texted you after I saw the movie because you said, you got to see this movie. And I said, I've already seen it. And the last thing I expected was to be crying at the end of a monster movie.
You're talking about the Frankenstein film.
Yeah. Oh, but Pinocchio too.
Yeah. No, so he is really excellent. So this is one of those films, if you have an opportunity, see it on the big screen, because it really allows you to immerse yourself in without breaks, for example, which and also on a bigger screen. And so go ahead, if you are in the area, go to Amherst Cinema. It's not playing at any other place here. If you are someplace else, seek out a theater and see it. But otherwise, it is going to be on Netflix, and see it because it is really fantastic. But this is a very particular take by Guillermo del Toro, and he actually makes it his own.
Tell us about what your thoughts are and the science that both Mary Shelley puts in the book and its exploration of science and the Jurassic Park question. We knew that we could, but we never asked if we should.
Nice.
This is something that is wrestled with in both the book and the new Guillermo del Toro movie, which Oscar Isaac, I think he's a fantastic Dr. Frankenstein. Christoph Waltz is always amazing. Mia Goth, her accent was a little bit off for me at the beginning, but I grew to love it and thought she was great. What's your take on the exploration of science in this new one?
Well, I mean, so I would distinguish it a little bit. The reason why the book Frankenstein is considered the first science fiction, and there are a lot of debates about what is science fiction and what is fantasy, for example, and how do you distinguish that? And one of the ways that people talk about it is like, okay, dragons, for example. Well, that is fantasy. That is not science fiction because it is not, they happens to be there. Or you have true supernatural elements to it. But in Frankenstein, because of Mary Shelley's own training and her father and her mother, although her mother, by the way, died soon after giving birth to Mary Shelley, there is a lot of aspects of Frankenstein is related to the science at the time, and the monster does not come out of magic or out of supernatural elements, but it was created by man in that sense, and literally by man, because man actually becomes a really important component to that by using various kinds of electrical experiments, electrical stimulations, and and that is something that was known at the time, partly because Polidori, who I mentioned, who was a physician over there, he actually knew of experiments by Galvani in Italy on, for example, on giving electrical shocks to the legs of a frog or to the frog, and the leg would twitch. So they knew that has something to do with, like, electrical current can do something to the body. And so those things were there. And at the time, there was this belief that maybe there is this there is something life force, that if you can give it to that, you can actually bring bodies back, or you can actually make life alive.
It happens in hospitals every day when they clear. Like it is science. It may not bring a totally dead corpse reanimated back to life, but there is some science that it still exists to this day. Then the truth there.
And that's where the fiction part comes in, right? I mean, so there are these elements. So Luigi Galvani, he did these experiments in 1781. And again, so around that time, it's like, okay, where can we go with that, right? And so today, for example, I mean, Jurassic Park, you mentioned, I mean, that's an interesting example. I mean, we don't know how to sort of, like, really bring back dinosaurs back, but we can actually see the kind of genetic manipulations that we can do. Then yeah, there is a plausibility of that.
And aren't they working on trying to bring a mammoth back and stuff like that?
Yes, and there are all these questions.
Good idea, everybody.
Right, and so
this is where fiction comes in. It's a warning.
And there is, but here is one of those things. And again, we're going to come back to the movie. So we'll be switching back between the book and the movie. That one thing is, yes, there is a danger, and yes, there could be like the Jurassic Park element, that they could go wild, and or, like, or they could kill you and things like that. And that is one question that a good science fiction does, which the Frankenstein, the book, does. Should we bring it back? And, like, and the danger of that. And people have compared it with the nuclear weapons, for example. Like, no, okay, so should we do that? Like, and so of course, the Oppenheimer. I mean,
not lost on me that the biography that was based on is called American Prometheus.
That's exactly right.
Frankenstein, a modern Prometheus. This idea: are we stealing this information from a god and bringing it to man? And should we be doing this?
But there is a second component which actually people often don't focus on, which is part of a large part of the book and is large part of this movie by Guillermo del Toro, and that is, what is the responsibility of the person who created that, or what is the responsibility of scientists who do this thing? Because the monster wants to be taken care of. The monster wants to be sort of like, that he wants a companion, because he's the only one here. And he wants, for example, Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, who's the scientist, to create him a bride.
Hasn't he seen Bride of Frankenstein? It already happens.
So that is, and so what is the responsibility to that? So regarding the cloning aspects as well, you're mentioning about the mammoth and the others. Well, I mean, as soon as something is being created, those are endangered species because they are the only ones, or there are a couple, and that is not the right frame of mind. What is the ethical responsibility of scientists who are doing that beyond, oh, they're going to kill us? That is just the one part of the thing. The second part is, okay, how do we take care of that? And I think that is the reason why. I mean, there is a lot of stuff in there, both in the book and the Guillermo del Toro's film, which is about that in some ways the monster is actually more pure. The monster is innocent. The monster is someone who is trying to do good. But it's the scientist, or it's Victor Frankenstein, who is a larger problem and who is being driven by his ego and his hubris and all of those things.
I don't know who said this quote first, but I love this quote and I think about it very frequently. Knowledge is knowing that Frankenstein is not the name of the monster.
Yeah.
Wisdom is knowing that it is.
Yeah. No,
I think that this movie says this so perfectly. I cannot urge you more strongly to go see this. Even if you have to wait for Netflix, you should, but try to see it in a big screen. And the other thing is that Amherst Cinema, this has been interpreted so many different ways. Young Frankenstein is one of my favorite movies, which actually does incorporate some important elements of the book too. But
a lot of elements, by the way.
Yeah.
Young Frankenstein has a lot of elements, actually. It is actually a really good film. It's from 1970, in the early 70s, I think. But anyway, Mel Brooks.
there is an even earlier version of the film Frankenstein that Amherst Cinema is going to show this week.
Yes, on Wednesday night, there is a screening of the 1931 version, which is considered as like one of the best versions ever. And Boris Karloff, he made famous by playing Frankenstein. And again, connecting it to the new film, Guillermo del Toro says that he watched that film when he was, I think, 7 or 8. And he wanted to make a Frankenstein film since then. And so he's deeply influenced by that. And it's a really well done film. So do see this rescreening of this original film as well. And there is an introduction as well about the film at Amherst Cinema. So do go and see.
Who's doing the introduction? A mad scientist?
No,
You?
Nina Kleinberg, who's actually a film scholar. So she actually introduces, she actually does a lot of at Amherst Cinema, provides the context of these films. And so that should be actually really good. But I want to bring back, before we close our conversation, to two things. One is, in this 1931 version as well, and that was the case soon after, in fact, Frankenstein was written, because the first stage play was actually performed in 1823.
So just 4 or 5 years after
It was published, but already by then, the focus was on the monster. The focus was on the horror part of the story. And the same thing happened in the early 20th century. There was a stage play that, again, the monster as thing to be repelled by, the horror part, that was being focused, rather than, again, on Victor Frankenstein, the scientist who created that, and the challenges that brings in. And that is the issue with this original 1931 Frankenstein film, because that was based on the play that was in there. But the second thing I wanted to mention regarding that was, but there are a lot of other elements in both the book and the movie. And in the book, of course, it is deeply influenced by Paradise Lost, Milton's Paradise Lost, which was in the 17th century, 1667. And in fact, the epigraph to the novel actually starts with the monster asking, or actually this is in the Paradise Lost, Adam asking God. And so this is the same kind of a thing. Did I request thee, maker, from my clay to mold me, man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? And this foundational question, which Adam asked again before being expelled from paradise, is no, why did I ask to be created? And I think that is the central question in Frankenstein, the book as well, and also in Guillermo del Toro's movie. Why did you create me? I did not ask to be created, and to suffer then through all of the things that happens. And so apart from Prometheus, again, so this is where we've talked about the myth of Prometheus, which is about the fire, but this is this other component to it, which connects it to religion, which connects it to larger philosophical questions. Whatever you think about the meaning of existence, how do you think about living, and so on and so forth, that's where it comes in. And to me, I listened to Guillermo del Toro's interview about that on Fresh Air, in fact, and one of the things that he talked about was that for him, it's the book of Job that actually he got closer to, and he actually asked the cast members to actually read that as well, because again, that also asks the same question, why me? But also the pain that actually goes through with that, because in the movie, and again, it's not a big spoiler because this is something that a couple of 100 years old, but also there is a variation of that, and that is that in the movie, not in the book, but in the movie, the monster cannot be killed or is immortal. And that plays a role as well because he is suffering, but he doesn't have death. And that goes back to the question that we started off with. Death is also crucial. Death is also important, but the monster cannot do that. So this question of why me? Why did you create me like that? Actually, that plays a role in that. And after all of this conversation, I should mention one last thing. While preparing for this, I read an article by a historian, Harvard historian. She writes for the New Yorker as well. Wonderful writer, Jill Lepore. She had written an article in 2018. This was the 200th anniversary of the publication of Frankenstein, the novel. And I did not know that we talk about the way we started conversation about the writing story about these great minds in 1816 having this conversation, a challenge about writing a ghost story, and then they came up with all of these things, and then it went on to become a novel. And we talk about the birth of science fiction and Mary Shelley, and then she wrote it anonymously and things like that. Jill Lepore, when I read that, I did not know that couple of Mary Shelley's, and she was 18 at the time, but so little before that, she had lost a child soon after childbirth. And she had not given the child a name because at the time, I mean, kids didn't survive that much. And so that was anonymous, that kid. And then she had a second kid and a third kid. They all died. And then she had a fourth kid that also died that was a little bit older than that. But so she brings up this angle, and childbirth is in, of course, the creation of Frankenstein, but also the story. It's part of that story as well of miscarriage, for example, and leading to the death of the mother of Victor Frankenstein and things like that. To me, that reminded me that I had read about these things about Frankenstein. I loved these stories. I had read about the birth of science fiction, but mostly from men. And we all get, oh, hey, science fiction and all of that stuff. But there is this whole other story which I had not read and which we don't hear. But of course, Jill Lepore writing about it, she's more sensitive to what is the origins of this Frankenstein? Part of the Frankenstein story actually comes from her own experiences, and her diaries were later published. Jill Lepore actually quotes from that, how she is writing about or working on reading different materials, but also thinking about the babies that she lost or she's losing. And it just goes back to this importance of different perspectives. I mean, I was just stunned by that. And the other thing that Jill Lepore brings up, which I didn't know, was that the stories were also related to emancipation debates. Both of Mary Shelley's parents actually were abolitionists. So they actually, and they were in England, but this Frankenstein, this element actually or this story was interpreted or read from the perspective of abolitionists as well in the United States. So all of this, the reason I wanted to bring it up is that this is the mark of a great literature, that there are many deep interpretations of that. And it's and those are important. And so I don't know how you are going to see how, people who are listening to it, how they are going to see this Frankenstein, how they are going to interpret. But there is so much material, and yes, go see Guillermo del Toro's version of Frankenstein because it is brilliant. And Monty, you mentioned that you cried at the end of this version, but also read the book. It is really rich, and this again reminds you, great literature. I mean, what life it has. So there are many, many, many stories out of one single book, many interpretations of that, and I think it's just tells you the power.
You could even say that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein book and everything that's come with it, it's alive. It's alive!
It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be God.